If you want to know how much money you're saving each month or how good of a saver you are, you have to calculate your savings rate. So, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Hi everyone. If you're new here, welcome to the channel where we learn to grow our wealth slow and steady. And if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the savings rate, which is an important personal finance metric that every single person should be tracking because it really is the key to building wealth. Now, before we go any further, I want to say that there are two ways to calculate your savings rate. One way is to look at what percentage of your gross income you are saving, and another way is to look at what percentage of your net income you're saving. Now, in this video, I am gonna talk about both of these methods and why it is important to understand both of them. But for the purpose of simplicity, most people are less going to focus on calculating their savings rate using their net income. That's the most common way to do it. So let us go ahead and jump into how you can calculate your savings rate using your net income. So, your net income is simply your take-home pay after taxes and other deductions like retirement contributions, health insurance premiums, etc. The first step is to figure out what your monthly net income is, which means taking your annual net income and dividing it by 12. This represents your income after taxes and other deductions. The second step is to identify all of your monthly expenses. These are the costs that you incur on a regular basis to maintain your lifestyle and meet your financial obligations. Some examples of these expenses include things like housing, utilities, transportation, food, clothing, entertainment, debt payments, etc. It's super important that you don't forget anything in this step because if you do, your calculation of your savings rate will be off. And trust me, you want to make sure that you get this part right. Once you've identified all of your monthly expenses, subtract that number from your monthly net income. This will give you the amount of money that you have left over each month. If you end up with a negative number, that means that you are spending more than you earn, and that is not a good place to be in. You need to take a hard look at your expenses and cut back so that you can start saving. And the last step in calculating your savings rate is to divide the result of step 2 by your monthly net income, which is your take-home pay, and multiply it by 100. This will give you a percentage, and that percentage is your savings rate. Let me walk you through an example to make sure that you fully understand this concept. So let's say that you have a net annual salary of $50,000. That means that your monthly net income is $4,166.67 per month. Let's also assume that your average monthly expenses are as follows: $1,500 for rent, $200 for utilities, $300 for transportation, $600 for food, $100 for clothing, $300 for entertainment, and $500 for debt payments and miscellaneous expenses. Now, if you add all of those up, that equals $3,400 in total monthly expenses. Step 2 would be to subtract your total monthly expenses from your monthly net income. So, $4,166.67. $3,400 equals $766.67. That's the amount of money that you have left over each month. And then the last step would be to divide that number by your monthly net income and multiply it by 100. So $766.67. $4,166.67 asterisk 100 equals 18.4%. So that means that you are saving 18.4% of your net income each month. And that's your savings rate. You may be wondering, okay, great. So how do I know if my savings rate is good or not? Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question because it really depends on your individual circumstances such as your age, income level, financial goals, and other factors. However, generally speaking, A good savings rate is considered to be anywhere from 10 to 20% of your net income. So, if your savings rate is 18.4%, that's pretty good. Now I want to talk about how you can increase your savings rate if it's below 10%, or if you're just looking for ways to save more money in general. So the first way to increase your savings rate is to reduce your expenses. We already talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's important to find areas where you can cut back and redirect that money towards your savings. You can do this by tracking your expenses, identifying areas where you can trim, and creating a budget. Another way to increase your savings rate is to increase your income. So, one way to do this is by asking for a raise at work. Another way is by taking on a side hustle or starting a business. And the last way to increase your savings rate is to automate your savings. So set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your savings account each month. That way, you won't be tempted to spend the money that you were supposed to be saving. Next, I want to talk about the other way to calculate your savings rate, which is using your gross income. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is less common, but it's still important to understand. Your gross income is your income before taxes and other deductions. So calculating your savings rate using your gross income gives you a broader perspective on how much you're saving relative to your total earnings. To calculate your savings rate using your gross income, you would follow the same basic steps that we followed earlier, except that you would use your gross income instead of your net income. So, you would start by calculating your monthly gross income by dividing your annual gross income by 12. Then you would identify all of your monthly expenses, subtract that number from your monthly gross income, and then divide the result by your monthly gross income and multiply it by 100. Now I am not going to walk you through an example of this because it's going to be very similar to the example that we walked through earlier. But I do want to point out that when you calculate your savings rate using your gross income, you're going to get a lower percentage than when you use your net income. That's because you're not taking into account the fact that a portion of your income is already being used to pay taxes and other deductions. Now I want to talk about why it's important to understand both ways of calculating your savings rate. So understanding both ways of calculating your savings rate helps you get a comprehensive view of your financial situation. It allows you to compare your savings rate to industry standards and best practices. And it also helps you identify areas where you can improve your financial performance. For example, if you calculate your savings rate using your gross income, and it's low, it may indicate that you need to reduce your expenses or find ways to increase your income. On the other hand, if you calculate your savings rate using your net income, and it's low, it may suggest that you need to take steps to increase your take-home pay, such as negotiating a higher salary or reducing the number of deductions that are taken from your paycheck. So, it's super important that you understand both ways of calculating your savings rate and use both methods to track your progress over time. Alright guys, I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone else who might benefit from it. I also would love it if you could subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.